A single sentence whispered between two men drowning in wealth can be a loaded gun. For Nina Petrova, a waitress invisible to the world she served, that sentence was a stray bullet she was never meant to catch. She served them wine that cost more than her rent, listening with a trained ear to the rhythm of their conversation. But then she heard it a pattern, a familiar, venomous tune from a past she fought to forget. In that moment, she faced a choice that would cost her everything she had or give her a life she could never imagine. She chose to speak. She warned the millionaire. And the very next day, a silent six-figure shadow of a car arrived at her door, not to reward her, but to collect her. The air in Aurelia, a restaurant perched atop a Chicago skyscraper, was thick with the scent of money. It smelled of seared scallops, aged Bordeaux, and the faint, expensive musk of perfumes designed to announce arrival without a word. Nina Petrova moved through this atmosphere like a ghost, a silent cog in a machine of extravagant indulgence. Her uniform, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, was a suit of armor and a cloak of invisibility. Tonight it felt particularly tight across her shoulders. For 3 years, Nina had perfected the art of being present, but unseen. She could refill a water glass without interrupting a sentence, clear a plate with the stealth of a cat, and predict a diner's need for the check with almost psychic accuracy. This job, with its demanding clientele and grueling hours, was the penance she paid for her father's mistakes and the price of her mother's medication. Every dollar she earned from tips, carefully smoothed out and tucked away, was a small victory against the crushing weight of student loans and the ever-present fear of a medical emergency. Her mother, Anya, was her entire world. A woman whose hands, once nimble on a piano, were now gnarled by a relentless autoimmune disease. Nina's dream wasn't of mansions or luxury cars. It was of a world where she didn't have to check the pharmacy bill twice and could afford the specialist who didn't take their state-sponsored insurance. Tonight, her station included Table 12, the prime corner booth with a panoramic view of the glittering city lights. It was occupied by Daniel Ashford and his guest. Nina knew of Daniel Ashford. Everyone in Chicago did. He was a titan of tech, a self-made millionaire before 30, known for his sharp mind and a portfolio that seemed to defy gravity. He had a reputation for being intense, but fair. In person, he looked younger than his photos, with a restless energy that even the plush leather of the booth couldn't contain. He barely looked at Nina, his focus entirely on the man sitting across from him. That man was Gavin Riley. Gavin was the physical opposite of Daniel. Where Daniel was coiled energy and sharp angles, Gavin was smooth, relaxed, and exuded an almost predatory charm. He wore a suit that was tailored to perfection, a watch on his wrist that probably could have paid off Nina's entire student debt, and he smiled with an ease that made Nina's skin crawl. She had seen men like him before, men who could talk the sun into setting in the east. Her father had fallen for a man just like Gavin. She approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with something from our wine list?" Daniel waved a hand dismissively, his eyes still locked on some document spread between them. "The usual, please. And another bottle of the San Pellegrino." Gavin, however, looked directly at Nina. His eyes, a cool, calculating blue, swept over her, not with overt lechery, but with a quick, dismissive appraisal, as if he were cataloguing a piece of furniture. "Make it the Oro-5 Lafitte," he said, his voice a low purr. "We're celebrating after all." He winked at Daniel. Daniel Ashford didn't seem to notice the wink, but Nina did. It wasn't a gesture of camaraderie. It was the wink of a showman, a performer playing to an audience of one. As the evening progressed, Nina moved in and out of their orbit, a silent satellite. She served them their Chateaubriand, decanted their obscenely expensive wine, and listened. She always listened. It was part of the job. You learned who was cheating, who was about to be fired, who was genuinely in love. And tonight she listened to Gavin Riley spin a tale of impossible profits. He spoke of something called the Helios Project. His words were a carefully constructed symphony of buzzwords: disruptive technology, proprietary algorithms, offshore leveraging, and Phase 1 capitalization. He painted a picture of a future where their investment would not just double or triple, but multiply by a factor of 100. The beauty of it, Danny, is the structure, Gavin said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The initial buy-in is routed through a series of holding companies in the Cayman Islands. It keeps it clean, untouchable. By the time the regulatory bodies even catch a whiff, we've already executed the Phase 2 asset flip. It's a ghost, pure, untraceable profit. Daniel listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was smart, Nina knew, but he was a builder, a creator. Gavin was a different animal entirely. He wasn't building anything. He was describing a magic trick, a shell game. And that's when Nina heard the phrase that sent a jolt of ice water through her veins. "It's a fail-safe investment," Gavin said smoothly. "A self-liquidating asset class." Nina froze behind a nearby column, a silver coffee pot, suddenly feeling as heavy as lead in her hand. Self-liquidating asset class. The words echoed in her memory, spoken in a different, slick voice, in a different city, to a different hopeful man. Her father. A real estate opportunity that was supposed to be a sure thing, a self-liquidating investment that had in fact liquidated their entire life savings, their house, and his will to live. It was the jargon of the sophisticated con artist, a meaningless phrase designed to sound so complex and secure that no one would dare question it for fear of looking stupid. She watched Gavin slide a final document across the table. "Just need your signature here on the transfer authorization, and we launch tomorrow at dawn. By this time next week you'll be thanking me from your new yacht." Daniel Ashford picked up the pen. He was a genius, a visionary, but in this gilded cage surrounded by the trappings of success, he was blind to the viper sharing his table. He trusted his friend. He saw a partner, not a predator. Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind screamed, "Walk away. It's not your business. You have a sick mother. You need this job. Don't get involved." Her training, her every instinct for self-preservation, told her to turn around, polish the silver, and forget everything she heard. She could lose her job in a heartbeat. Mr. Dubois, the restaurant manager, had a zero-tolerance policy for bothering the guests. But then she saw her father's face in her mind's eye. The hollowed-out look of a man who realized he had been played the shame that had followed him to his early grave. She saw the repossession notice on their front door. She saw her mother weeping silently in the kitchen. Daniel Ashford's pen touched the paper. In that split second, the fear of losing her job was eclipsed by a fiercer, more righteous anger. The ghosts of her past refused to stay silent. She pushed herself away from the pillar. Her legs felt unsteady, but her resolve was iron. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and walked towards table 12, stepping out of the shadows and into the line of fire. The tip of Daniel Ashford's Mont Blanc pen hovered millimeters above the signature line. The quiet scratch it was about to make would signal the transfer of $50 million, the key to unlocking the next phase of his company's expansion, now rerouted into Gavin Riley's elaborate fiction. "Excuse me, Mr. Ashford." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the low hum of the restaurant with the precision of a scalpel. Both men looked up, their bubble of mutual congratulation instantly pierced. Nina stood beside the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. Daniel's expression was one of pure annoyance. "We don't need anything," he said, his tone clipped, dismissing her as he would a fly. Gavin, however, leaned back, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his lips. He recognized the interruption for what it was, a challenge. "Is there a problem with the service?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern, loud enough for the nearby tables to notice. Nina ignored him, keeping her gaze fixed on Daniel. "Mr. Ashford," she repeated, her voice a little stronger this time. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Nina. I couldn't help but overhear some of your conversation." Daniel's annoyance hardened into a cold glare. "Our conversation is private. I know, sir, and I wouldn't dare interrupt unless it was a matter of utmost urgency." She pressed on her heart, thumping a frantic rhythm against her sternum. "That phrase your guest used, self-liquidating asset class." Gavin let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What are you, an economics student? Get back to pouring water, sweetheart." Nina's jaw tightened at the condescending term, but she didn't flinch. "No, sir. I'm the daughter of a man who lost everything to a scam that used those exact words. It's a term that doesn't exist in legitimate finance. It's designed to sound impressive while meaning nothing. It's a red flag." The atmosphere at the table turned glacial. Daniel slowly put his pen down. He wasn't looking at Nina anymore. He was looking at Gavin, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't believe her, not yet. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Gavin saw it too, and his mask of charming nonchalance slipped. His smile became a tight, menacing line. "Are you accusing me of something?" he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "In front of my oldest friend and business partner." "I'm not accusing you of anything, sir," Nina said, choosing her words with care. "I am simply warning Mr. Ashford that the language you are using is identical to the language used by the man who defrauded my family of their entire life savings. I am asking him respectfully to please perform one more layer of due diligence before signing that document." "This is outrageous." Gavin slammed his hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. "Danny, are you going to listen to this? A waitress who probably has a community college diploma is giving you financial advice. She's probably trying to shake us down." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and venomous. Daniel looked at Nina. His eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of deception. He saw only a desperate sincerity. But this was Gavin. They had come up together, built their first company in a garage. Their trust was forged over 15 years of shared struggles and triumphs. Who was this woman, a complete stranger, to question that bond? "She's right, Gavin," Daniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is outrageous." He turned his cold fury on Nina. "You have exactly 10 seconds to walk away from this table and disappear before I have you thrown out of here for harassment. You have no idea what you're talking about, and you have just slandered my best friend." "Who do you think you are?" Tears pricked Nina's eyes, not from fear, but from the sting of his dismissal. She had gambled everything on his reputation for being intelligent, for being fair. She had lost. "I'm nobody, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm just someone who has seen this exact play before. I know how it ends." The commotion had attracted the attention of the restaurant manager, a severe, hawk-nosed man named Mr. Dubois. He scurried over his face, a mask of mortified apology. "Mr. Ashford, Mr. Riley, my sincerest apologies. Is there a problem here?" he asked, shooting a murderous glare at Nina. "Your waitress," Gavin said, pointing a finger at Nina, "has been harassing us, accusing me of being a criminal. I've never been so insulted in my life. We are frequent patrons here, Jean-Pierre. This is unacceptable." Mr. Dubois' face went from pale to ashen. Aurelia's reputation was built on its discretion and its service to the city's elite. An incident like this could be catastrophic. "Nina," he hissed, grabbing her by the arm. "My office. Now." He dragged her away from the table, away from Daniel Ashford's stony expression and Gavin Riley's triumphant smirk. As she was pulled through the dining room, she felt the stares of the other patrons like physical blows. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. In the cramped, windowless office, Mr. Dubois didn't waste any time. "Are you insane?" he shrieked, his French accent thickening with rage. "Daniel Ashford is one of our most important clients. You accuse his guest of being a con man. You, a waitress. You have ruined this restaurant's reputation." "Mr. Dubois, please, Silence," he snapped. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You are a liability. You are fired. Get your things from your locker and get out. You are not to set foot in this establishment ever again. Consider yourself lucky that Mr. Riley isn't pressing charges." The word "fired" hit her with the force of a physical blow. Just like that, it was over. The job that paid for her mother's prescriptions, the job that kept a roof over their heads, gone in an instant. All because she had tried to do the right thing. She didn't argue. There was no point. She numbly walked to the staff locker room, her colleagues averting their eyes, whispering behind their hands. She changed out of her uniform, the symbol of her invisibility, and put on her worn-out coat. As she walked out the service exit into the cold, rain-slicked alley, the sounds of the opulent restaurant faded behind her. She was left with nothing but the chilling echo of Gavin Riley's laughter and the heavy, bitter price of a truth no one wanted to hear. The walk to the L train station was a blur of neon lights reflecting on wet pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last, the finality of her actions settling into her bones like the damp Chicago chill. Nina's apartment was in a part of the city the patrons of Aurelia never saw, a tired brick building where the hallways smelled of boiled cabbage and disinfectant. She let herself into the small, meticulously clean apartment she shared with her mother. Anya was asleep in her armchair, a worn quilt pulled up to her chin, the television murmuring softly. The stack of medical bills on the small table by the door seemed to mock her. A wave of nausea and despair washed over Nina. What had she done? She had traded a stable, if grueling, job for a moment of futile righteousness. She sank onto her own bed, the springs groaning in protest, and buried her face in her hands. The humiliation was a raw, open wound, but beneath it was a deeper ache, the terror of the future. How would she explain this to her mother? How would they pay the rent next month? How would she afford the refill for Anya's medication, the one that kept the worst of the pain at bay? She had acted to prevent another man's ruin, and in doing so had guaranteed her own. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with the phantom sound of a pen scratching on paper, sealing a fate that was no longer hers to influence. Meanwhile, miles away, in a penthouse apartment that overlooked the vast, dark expanse of Lake Michigan, Daniel Ashford could not sleep. The confrontation at the restaurant played on a loop in his mind. The waitress Nina, she'd said her name, was her pale, earnest face, the tremor in her voice, the conviction in her eyes. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing little to soothe the disquiet in his gut. Gavin had been furious, of course. He had ranted all the way down in the elevator about classless gold diggers and the entitlement of the working class. Daniel had agreed, had defended his friend, had assured him the deal was still on, that they would sign the papers first thing in the morning at his office. But the seed of doubt, once planted, had taken root. A self-liquidating asset class. He had glossed over the term when Gavin had said it. Gavin had a flair for dramatic, impressive-sounding language. It was part of his salesmanship. But the waitress's words echoed. It's a term that doesn't exist in legitimate finance. Daniel sat down at his sleek glass desk and powered on his computer. This was foolish. It was a waste of time. He trusted Gavin, but he was also a man who had built an empire on data and verification. He never invested on a hunch. He invested on facts. Trust, but verify, his first mentor had always told him. Just to put his own mind at ease, he would do a little digging. He typed the phrase into a search engine. The results were sparse. A few articles on financial scams, forum posts from people who had been burned by too-good-to-be-true investment schemes, an academic paper from a professor of forensic accounting listing it under jargon of financial fraud. Not a single reputable financial institution or journal used the term. A cold knot formed in the pit of his stomach. It was probably nothing. A coincidence. He pulled up the digital prospectus for the Helios project that Gavin had sent him. He'd read it a dozen times, but he'd been focused on the projections, the impressive ROI, the market disruption potential. This time, he read it differently. He read it with Nina's warning in his ears. He started with the basics, the holding companies Gavin had mentioned. He ran their names through a series of international business registries he had access to. The first, Apollo Holdings Group, was registered in the Caymans just as Gavin had said, but its date of incorporation was only 3 weeks ago. Strange for a company supposedly managing a project of this scale. The listed directors were generic names, probably proxies. He dug deeper, using a more powerful corporate intelligence tool. He cross-referenced the registration agent. The same agent had been used to set up a string of other companies, all with similar vague names and short lifespans. Several of them were linked to ventures that had collapsed spectacularly, leaving investors with nothing. His heart began to beat faster. This was still circumstantial. It wasn't proof. He moved on to the proprietary technology at the heart of the project. The prospectus was filled with impressive diagrams and technical specifications. On previous readings, he had accepted them at face value. Now he copied a block of the technical description and pasted it into a plagiarism checker. The results came back almost instantly. The entire section had been lifted word for word from a defunct tech startup's white paper from 5 years ago, a company that had gone bankrupt after its much-hyped technology was proven to be fraudulent. The cold knot in his stomach turned into a block of ice. It couldn't be. Not Gavin. Not the man who had been the best man at his short-lived wedding. The man who'd been by his side since they were nobodies with a dream. Finally, he looked at the wire transfer instructions on the document he had almost signed. The account number for the initial $50 million investment. He ran it through a banking analysis program he'd designed himself for security purposes. The account wasn't held by Apollo Holdings Group. It was a personal multi-currency account in Zurich, an account that could be emptied in a matter of seconds, the funds scattered across the globe, untraceable. A ghost. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. The panoramic view of the city, usually a symbol of his success, now felt like a cage. He had been so focused on the horizon that he hadn't seen the snake at his feet. The waitress, Nina. She hadn't been trying to shake him down. She hadn't been a crazed gold digger. She had been a Cassandra, a prophet whose warning he had arrogantly dismissed. She had seen the truth in a single phrase because she had lived the consequences. She had tried to save him, and in return he had let her be humiliated and fired. He had destroyed her livelihood to protect the honor of a man who was about to gut him. A wave of shame, hot and potent, washed over him, followed by a surge of cold, focused rage. The game was not over. Gavin had made a critical mistake. He had shown his hand too early, and he had underestimated the observant eyes of a waitress who had nothing to lose by speaking the truth. Daniel Ashford picked up his phone. He didn't call Gavin. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben Carter. "Ben," he said, his voice low and hard as steel, "I need you to find someone. Her name is Nina Petrova. She was a waitress at Aurelia until about 3 hours ago. I need to know everything about her. And I need you to have a car ready. First thing in the morning." The morning sun did little to warm Nina's bleak apartment. It streamed through the thin curtains, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air and highlighting the shabbiness of their threadbare furniture. Nina was awake before dawn, the same sick dread from the night before curdling in her stomach. She had broken the news to Anya, framing it as a layoff, a corporate downsizing, to spare her the shame of the truth. Her mother, bless her heart, had simply squeezed her hand and said, "We will manage, Ninka. We always do." But Nina could see the new worry etched around her mother's tired eyes. She spent the morning on her laptop, the screen, a cruel blue glow in the dim room. She scrolled through job listings, waitressing positions at diners that paid minimum wage data entry jobs that required qualifications she didn't have, call center openings that promised soul-crushing monotony. Every rejection, every "we'll keep your application on file," felt like another nail in her coffin. She felt a profound sense of hopelessness, a feeling that she was trapped in a cycle of poverty that her one act of courage had only served to accelerate. Around 10 o'clock, a strange stillness fell over their normally noisy street. The usual sounds of sirens, car horns, and shouting neighbors were replaced by a low, expectant hush. Nina glanced out the window, curious, and then she saw it. It was a car, but calling it a car felt like calling a lion a cat. It was a Mercedes Maybach S-Class, long and sleek and impossibly black, its paint so deep it seemed to absorb the light around it. It was parked directly in front of their crumbling brownstone, a vessel from another dimension that had somehow materialized in her gritty reality. The contrast was so stark, it was almost comical, the pinnacle of German engineering and luxury parked next to a row of overflowing garbage cans. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, their conversations dying in their throats. Kids on the sidewalk stopped their games to stare, their mouths agape. Nina's first thought was panic. A cold, sharp fear stabbed at her. It had to be Gavin Riley. He was powerful, connected. This was a message, a threat, a show of force to intimidate her into silence. Maybe he thought she would go to the police. This car was here to tell her what happened to people who crossed him. Then the driver's side door opened. A man in a tailored black suit and sunglasses emerged. He wasn't a brutish thug. He was calm, professional, and moved with an efficient grace that was somehow more menacing. He walked around to the passenger side, his polished shoes clicking on the cracked pavement, and scanned the front of her building. Her buzzer shrieked a harsh, grating sound that made her jump. Anya called out from the living room, her voice laced with confusion. Ninka, who could that be? Nina's mouth was dry. She walked to the old intercom panel, her hand trembling as she pressed the talk button. "Yes," her voice came out as a squeak. A smooth, dispassionate voice answered devoid of any accent or emotion. "I am here for Ms. Nina Petrova." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Who are you?" Nina managed to ask. "My name is Thomas. I've been sent by Mr. Ashford. He has requested your presence." Mr. Ashford. The name hit her even harder than Gavin's would have. Daniel Ashford. Was he sending someone to serve her with a lawsuit for slander, to have her arrested? Her humiliation at the restaurant wasn't enough. Now he was going to ruin her legally too. I'm not going anywhere," she stammered. There was a pause. "Ms. Petrova." The voice came back, still unnervingly calm. "Mr. Ashford assured me you would be reluctant. He asked me to tell you this is not a request you should refuse. It is not about what happened last night. It is about what happens next. He also asked me to convey his deepest apologies." Apologies? The word was so unexpected, it threw her completely off balance. Why would Daniel Ashford apologize? Anya appeared in the hallway behind her, clutching her robe. "Ninka, what is going on? Who is that man?" Nina was trapped. Her mind raced. If she refused, what would happen? Would they leave, or would they simply wait? This felt less like an invitation, and more like a summons. The mention of an apology, however, was a sliver of hope in a sea of fear. What if she had been wrong? What if this wasn't a threat? Taking a shaky breath, she made a decision. Running and hiding felt more dangerous than facing this head-on. Tell Mr. Ashford I will be down in 5 minutes." "Very good, Miss Petrova." She turned to her mother, trying to project a confidence she was nowhere near feeling. "It's okay, Mama. It's about a job, a misunderstanding. I have to go." With a man in a car like that, "Ninka, this is not our world." "I know," Nina said, giving her mother a quick, fierce hug. "But maybe it's time I stopped being scared of it." She quickly changed out of her pajamas into the nicest clothes she owned, a pair of dark-wash jeans and a simple, clean blouse. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror on her bedroom door. She looked like what she was, a scared young woman from the wrong side of town, about to step into a limousine, and an unknown fate. Walking down the stairs and out the front door felt like walking a gangplank. The driver, Thomas, stood holding the rear door open. He nodded once at her, his expression unreadable behind the dark glasses. The interior of the car was a cavern of cream-colored leather and polished wood. It smelled new, expensive, and sterile. It was utterly silent, the sounds of the city completely cut off the moment the heavy door closed with a soft, satisfying thud. The car pulled away from the curb with a silent electric grace, gliding through the streets of her neighborhood like a phantom. Nina stared out the tinted window at the familiar, gritty landscape flashing past, feeling as though she were already a world away from it. She didn't know where she was going or why, only that her life, which had crumbled to dust just hours before, was about to change direction in a way she could never have predicted. Her heart pounded, a nervous, uncertain rhythm, a drumbeat for the start of a new, terrifying chapter. The journey was a silent, surreal tour through the socio-economic strata of Chicago. The Maybach moved seamlessly from Nina's neighborhood of weathered brick and chain-link fences to the manicured lawns of Lincoln Park, and finally into the steel and glass canyon of the Loop. The car didn't stop at a courthouse or a police station. It pulled into a private subterranean garage beneath a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. The letters on the gleaming marble wall of the entrance read, "Ashford Enterprises." Thomas escorted her from the car to a private elevator. There were no buttons inside, just a small, discreet panel where he swiped a keycard. The elevator ascended with breathtaking speed and silence, the floor indicator a blur of numbers. It opened directly into an office that was larger than Nina's entire apartment building floor. Glass walls offered a 360-degree view of Chicago, the city laid out below like a map. The furnishings were minimalist and modern, a massive desk made of a single piece of polished oak, a low-slung leather sofa, and abstract art on the walls that Nina recognized as being worth millions. It was a space designed to communicate absolute power. And standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at his domain, was Daniel Ashford. He turned as she entered, and the man she saw was not the arrogant, dismissive billionaire from the restaurant. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, his tie was loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept at all. He looked tired, humbled, and deeply serious. "Ms. Petrova," he said, his voice quiet. "Nina, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured towards 2 chairs positioned near the window. Thomas, the driver, gave a slight bow and retreated back into the elevator, the doors closing silently behind him, leaving the 2 of them alone in the vast, silent space. Nina's fear was slowly being replaced by a profound confusion. She perched on the edge of the leather chair, her hands clutching her worn purse in her lap. Daniel didn't sit. He walked over and stood before her, his posture conveying none of the dominance it had the night before. "I don't know where to begin," he said, running a hand through his hair, "except to say I am sorry. Profoundly and utterly sorry. What I said to you last night, how I treated you, was inexcusable. You were trying to help me, and I repaid your courage with cruelty and arrogance. There is no excuse for it." Nina was so stunned she couldn't speak. An apology was the last thing she had expected. He continued, his voice laced with a self-directed anger she hadn't thought him capable of. "After you left, I couldn't get your words out of my head. So I did what I should have done weeks ago. I started digging." He walked over to his desk and picked up a tablet, bringing it to her. He swiped through several screens, each one containing charts, documents, and highlighted text. "The Helios project," he said, his voice grim, "is a complete fabrication. A ghost, just as you heard Gavin say. But he wasn't talking about the profits. He was talking about my money." He began to lay out the full extent of Gavin Riley's betrayal. It was a scheme of breathtaking audacity. The proprietary technology was plagiarized. The offshore holding companies were newly created shells registered under false names. They were designed not for investment, but for money laundering. "This document," Daniel said, pointing to a wire transfer form on the screen, the one I almost signed at our table. "This wasn't the first transfer. It was the last. Gavin has been using our friendship, our shared history, to gain access to my company's finances for months. He initiated a series of smaller, seemingly legitimate capital outlays for the project. He was bleeding me slowly moving funds into accounts he controlled." He swiped to another screen, a complex flowchart. This final $50 million transfer was the kill shot. It wasn't an investment. It was the trigger. The moment that money left my account, it would have activated clauses he'd secretly embedded in our corporate partnership, agreements, clauses I signed without reading closely because I trusted him. It would have declared a liquidity crisis, allowing his holding companies, which he'd positioned as creditors, to initiate a hostile takeover of Ashford Enterprises. He wasn't just trying to steal $50 million. He was trying to take everything. My company, my patents, my legacy. Everything I've ever built. Nina listened, horrified. The scale of the deception was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her father had lost their savings. Daniel Ashford had been on the verge of losing an empire. "Your warning," Daniel said finally, looking her directly in the eyes, his own filled with a raw, painful gratitude, was like a flare in the dark. That one phrase you picked up on, self-liquidating asset class, it was the loose thread. When I pulled on it, his entire tapestry of lies unraveled. He sank into the chair opposite her, the energy seeming to drain out of him. "I've known him for 15 years, Nina. He was my brother in all but blood. I never would have seen it coming. You, a complete stranger, saw in 15 minutes what I failed to see in 15 years. A heavy silence filled the office, broken only by the distant sound of a siren far below. Nina finally found her voice. What happened to him?" "To Gavin." Daniel's expression hardened into granite. When he arrived here this morning, expecting me to sign the final papers, he wasn't met by me. He was met by my lawyers and the FBI. He's in federal custody. The funds he's already siphoned are being frozen and recovered. He will not be seeing the light of day for a very, very long time. Nina felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made her dizzy. She hadn't been crazy. She had been right. And she had, in her own small way, saved this man. But that doesn't fix what I did to you, Daniel said, his voice soft again. I made some calls this morning to your former manager, Mr. Dubois. He was uncooperative until I informed him that my company would be buying the restaurant group's parent corporation tomorrow, and that his position was the first thing I planned on eliminating. He changed his tune quickly. He will be calling you with a formal apology and an offer of your job back with a promotion. Nina shook her head. I could never go back there. I know, Daniel said with a small, sad smile. I wouldn't expect you to, which is why I brought you here. The car that picked you up, it wasn't a threat and it isn't a gift. It's a tool, and I have a proposition for you. Nina stared at him, her mind struggling to keep pace with the day's seismic shifts. Just yesterday she was serving overpriced steaks and worrying about her mother's health. Now she was sitting in a billionaire's penthouse, having brought down a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, and he was talking about propositions. A proposition? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The last 24 hours have taught me a very painful, very expensive lesson, Daniel said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. I've surrounded myself with people who have Ivy League degrees, impressive resumes, and the right connections, people who know how to talk the talk. But I've been blind. I've valued pedigree over perception, credentials over character. Gavin was the ultimate example of that. He looked the part, he sounded the part, but he was rotten to the core. He paused, his gaze intense. You, on the other hand, you have something that can't be taught at Harvard Business School. You have what I can only describe as real-world intelligence. You see patterns other people miss. You listen when everyone else is just waiting for their turn to talk. And you have integrity. You had everything to lose and absolutely nothing to gain by warning me, but you did it anyway. That Nina is rarer and more valuable than all the money in my bank accounts. He stood up and walked back towards his desk, his energy returning, now channeled into a new purpose. My company is shattered. Not financially, we'll recover from that. But my trust is broken. I need to rebuild, and I need to do it with a different kind of person on my team. People I can trust implicitly. People who see the world differently. He turned back to her. I am creating a new division within Ashford Enterprises. A small elite special projects team that will report directly to me. It will act as my eyes and ears, vetting new ventures, analyzing potential partners, assessing threats and opportunities that our conventional analysts might miss. It will be a team built on intuition and integrity as much as on data. He took a deep breath. Nina Petrova, I would like to offer you the first position on that team. Not as a waitress, not as a charity case, as a founding member, an associate analyst. Nina's jaw dropped. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. Mr. Ashford, that's insane. I don't have a degree in finance. My college education is in literature, and I didn't even finish because I had to take care of my mother. I don't know the first thing about corporate analysis. You know how to spot a liar, he countered instantly. You know how to recognize a con. You proved that. I can teach you how to read a balance sheet and analyze a market forecast. I can't teach someone to have your courage or your instincts. You have the raw talent. I have the resources to refine it." He saw the disbelief warring with a dawning hope in her eyes, and pressed his advantage. "The position comes with a starting salary of $150,000 a year." Nina gasped. The number was so astronomical, so far beyond her reality, that it barely registered as real. It was more money than her father had made in the last 5 years of his life combined. "It also comes with a full benefits package." He continued, his tone becoming gentle. "The best health insurance my company can provide. For you and for your mother. Effective immediately." That was the blow that shattered her defenses. Not the money, not the prestige, but the thought of her mother having access to the best doctors, the best treatments, without the suffocating worry of cost. The thought of lifting that terrible burden from Anya's shoulders. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the incredible view from the window. "My head of security. Ben did a thorough background check on you this morning. I apologize for the invasion of privacy, but I had to understand who you were. I know about your student debt. I know about your mother's illness and her medical bills." He picked up a file from his desk. "If you accept this position, Ashford Enterprises will assume your outstanding student loans and pay them off in full. We will also retroactively cover all of your mother's medical expenses for the past 2 years and establish a fund for her future care. Consider it back pay for the consulting fee you should have charged me last night." Nina could no longer hold back the tears. They streamed down her face, tears of shock, of relief, of a hope so fierce it was painful. She was being offered not just a job, but a new life, an escape, a future. But a small, cautious part of her brain, the part that had survived so much, whispered a warning. This world of private jets and corporate espionage was dangerous. Gavin Riley was in custody, but men like him had powerful friends. Was she stepping into a gilded cage far more dangerous than the restaurant? Daniel seemed to read her thoughts. "I understand this is overwhelming, and I won't lie to you, Nina. The work will be demanding. The stakes will be high. My world can be complicated, but you will have my full protection. You saved me and my company. I will not let anything happen to you." He extended his hand. It was not a gesture of dismissal, but one of partnership. An invitation. Nina looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of the greasy feel of dirty plates, the ache in her feet after a 12-hour shift, the constant gnawing anxiety of the next bill. Then she thought of her mother's gentle smile and the possibility of seeing that smile free from the shadow of pain and worry. Her decision was made. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep, steadying breath, and placed her small, trembling hand into his. His grip was firm and reassuring. "Okay, Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice filled with a newfound fragile strength. "Okay, Daniel. I accept." The week that followed was a dizzying whirlwind that felt more like a dream than reality. Nina's old life was dismantled, and a new one constructed around her with astonishing speed. The first order of business was moving. Daniel insisted, stating that her old apartment was a security risk. Within 48 hours, she and Anya were settled into a beautiful sunlit condominium in a secure building overlooking Lincoln Park, paid for by the company. For the first time in years, Anya had a walk-in shower she could use safely, and a small balcony where she could sit in the sun. Watching her mother's bewildered joy was worth more to Nina than any salary. Next came the wardrobe. A personal stylist, a chic and impossibly patient woman named Jessica, met Nina at Nordstrom, and with Daniel's corporate card, outfitted her with a new professional wardrobe. As Nina stood in front of a 3-way mirror, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, she saw not a waitress but a stranger. a woman who looked confident, capable and powerful. For the first time, she felt like she might actually belong in Daniel Ashford's world. Her first day at the office was terrifying and exhilarating. She was given a spacious office next to Daniel's with the same breathtaking view. She met Ben Carter, the enigmatic head of security, who gave her a quiet, respectful nod that made her feel surprisingly safe. The other executives were wary of her at first, this young woman with no background who had suddenly appeared at the CEO's right hand. But Daniel's unwavering support was her shield. He introduced her simply as the newest member of our strategic analysis team with a unique skill set we are fortunate to have. Her work was challenging. Daniel started her on small things, having her read over investment proposals and sit in on meetings, asking for her quiet observations afterward. "What did you see, Nina?" he'd ask. "Forget the numbers for a second. Read the person." And she found to her astonishment that she was good at it. She noticed the nervous twitch of a CEO who was over-promising, the subtle glance between partners that hinted at a hidden disagreement, the overly polished pitch that sounded just a little too much like Gavin Riley's. She was learning a new language, the non-verbal language of power and deception, and she was a natural. The most profound change was for Anya. Within a week, she had an appointment with one of the top rheumatologists in the country. A new treatment plan was drawn up, new medications prescribed. The fund Daniel had established meant there was no hesitation, no worried calculation. There was only care. One evening, Nina came home to find her mother sitting at the new baby grand piano that had been delivered to the apartment, a surprise from Daniel. Anya's fingers, still stiff, haltingly, picked out a simple melody from her childhood. She was crying, but for the first time in a decade, her tears were tears of pure joy. At that moment, Nina knew she had made the right choice. She had not just been given a job, she had been given her mother's life back. It felt like a fairy tale ending, a perfect resolution. But the real world rarely deals in perfect endings. 1 month into her new life, Nina was working late with Daniel, poring over a potential acquisition. The city glittered below them, a sea of diamonds. An alert chimed on Daniel's phone. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. It was a security notification from Ben. "What is it?" Nina asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He enlarged the image on his screen, his expression turning cold and hard. He angled the phone so she could see. It was a photograph clearly taken with a long lens camera from a building across the street. The picture was of her, Nina, walking out of the front entrance of the Ashford Enterprises building earlier that day. She was smiling, talking on her phone, a briefcase in her hand. But that wasn't the chilling part. In the background, standing across the street, partially obscured by a newspaper stand, was a man. He was thinner than he had been, his face gaunt and pale, but there was no mistaking him. It was Gavin Riley. Nina's blood ran cold. But you said he was in custody. The FBI. He was, Daniel said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He posted bail, an astronomical sum. Someone with very deep pockets and a vested interest in my failure must have put it up for him. He's out and he's been watching you. The fairy tale dissolved, replaced by a stark, terrifying reality. Gavin hadn't just been a con artist. He was part of a much larger, more dangerous network, and he hadn't forgotten the waitress who had cost him everything. The threat wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Nina looked from the photograph to Daniel. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was different now. It was mingled with a new, steely resolve. She was no longer the invisible waitress, scared and alone. She was a member of his team. She was a survivor. Daniel looked at the picture, at the clear threat to the woman who had saved him. His protective instinct, raw and powerful, surged to the forefront. He had made a promise. Ben is already tracking him. Daniel said, his thumb already dialing his head of security. We're moving you and your mother to a secure residence tonight. You won't be alone for a second. This ends now. He met Nina's gaze, and in his eyes she saw not just the billionaire CEO, but a partner, a protector. Their journey had started with a warning, whispered in a restaurant, and now it had evolved into a silent pact. He had given her a new life, and now, together, they would fight the shadows that threatened to destroy it. Nina Petrova's story is a powerful reminder that courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting in spite of it. One moment of bravery, one decision to speak truth to power, changed her world forever. It shows us that integrity is a currency more valuable than money, and that sometimes the person with the least power in the room is the one who sees things the most clearly. But as we see, real life isn't a fairy tale. Exposing a villain doesn't make them disappear. It often makes them more dangerous. Nina's new life came with a new set of challenges, a lingering threat that proves her journey is far from over. If Nina's story of courage and transformation moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of the power of their own voice. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about the unexpected heroes who walk among us. What do you think Nina and Daniel should do next? Let us know in the comments below.